The first crack sounded like a pistol shot. Elias Mercer looked up from the corral just in time to see a black seam open across his ranch's water tower. A long, splintering smile in weather-silvered planks. 6,000 gallons didn't fall so much as lunge. Hurling through the sluice, bucking fence posts from the earth and turning the slope below Mercer Ridge into a brown river aimed straight at the mule pens. "Gate!" He barked to no one, already running. He threw a lariat over the blow-off valve and heaved. The rope burned his palms, the iron wheels shrieked, and the torrent veered into a dry arroyo a heartbeat before it reached the panicked animals. Cold spray caught his face. Lightning stitched the far shoulders of the Colorado Plateau, counting down to a storm the radio in Silver Butte had promised would blow light, if at all. Radios lied. Wood and weather did not. By dusk, the tower was strapped like a wounded soldier. 2 wagon chains and a pair of telegraph crossarms braced across the split. It would hold for a day. Maybe 2. Elias needed hands. Not ranch hands. He had 2 good riders for that. But someone who could scrub oil from floorboards, shovel silt out of tacked drawers, bleach water troughs, and do it yesterday. He rode into town and tacked a scrap of paper to the chapel notice board and the feed store door. Help wanted. Cleaning, hauling, no questions. Day wages paid cash. E. Mercer, Ridge Road. He did not expect the first answer to arrive on foot at sunup. The woman wore a threadbare red coat and a man's hat pulled low. Dust clung to her hem. A faint line of soot traced one cheek like a fingerprint. She didn't ask his rate. She didn't ask if there was a bunk. "Work's work," she said. "Name's Mara Quinn. Mara didn't clean like a maid. She fought like a sapper." She tore the slumped feed-room shelves down, rebuilt them with the tower's spare crossarms, then used ash and river sand to scour the oil slick from the plank floor until it rasped under Elias's boots. When a trough was too heavy for one person to tip, she rigged a pulley from a hay hook and bridle strap and grinned at the physics when it obeyed. She hardly spoke, but she hummed sometimes. Odd, low notes that made the horses still their ears. Twice she refused the coffee he offered. Once she tucked half the cornbread he left on a barrel into a tin map tube and slid it inside her coat. "You've got people up canyon?" Elias asked, trying out nonchalance. "I've got miles to cover before dark," she said, tying her coat with quick, neat hands. "And I don't take advances." The sky was the color of hammered pewter when she started down the wagon ruts toward the old ore spur. Elias told himself to let it be. Pride was a fence. He recognized it because he'd lived behind one for years. Still, there was that map tube, and the way she glanced, not at the road, but at the high rimrock where ravens nested, scanning for watchers, not waymarks. He noticed small things. You had to keep a ranch alive where rain came like a rumor and left like a debt collector. He stepped into the feed room to find his gloves and nearly kicked a carved horse no bigger than his thumb. Not store whittling. Child's work, uneven curls, a tail hinted by 3 stubborn cuts, the kind of toy made with a dull knife and a patient hour. It was not Mara's. Lightning flared again, closer now, and somewhere up canyon, a single bell clanged. Not the church bell, but the iron tongue of the rail yard's old warning gong. Once, twice, 3 times, with the long pause they used in winter when the volunteer firemen were called to canyon floods. The tower groaned behind him. The clouds shouldered each other, bruised dark. Elias pulled on his coat, grabbed his lantern, and saddled the dun mare. The road to the abandoned way station cut along a shale shelf that liked to let go when it rained. Tonight, it had more than rain to chew. Hail pecked his hat brim. The lantern swung, throwing thin sheets of light that made the sagebrush twitch like foxes. He found her tracks in the damp, small, fast, and accompanied by others that made his chest tighten. A toe drag, a scuff, the half-moon of a shoe nailed and re-nailed until the leather gave up. Not one set. Several. A family's worth, crossed and recrossed, turning off the road just shy of the collapsed trestle to vanish beneath the slumped siding of the way shack. "Mara!" he called, voice swallowed by thunder. A flame winked twice from a crack in the boards. The lantern glow inside shook, steadied, and a whisper threaded out. "Don't shout," Mara hissed, the slopes ready to go. Elias dismounted, slid sideways to the wall, and pressed his ear to the seam. He heard it then. Soft, ragged, overlapping, a cluster of breaths. One coughed, the brittle barking kind that comes from cold, not sickness. Another made the small, sleepy sound children make when they don't quite wake. He had come looking for someone to clean out a mess of silt and oil. Behind the false wall of an abandoned way station, Elias Merc had just found the reason a woman saved half her cornbread. And 4 lives the storm would not forgive. Elias crouched by the wall, the storm clawing at his coat. Through a crack between the warped planks, he saw a flicker of firelight and the unmistakable curve of Mara's face, half lit by the glow of a tiny lantern. She wasn't alone. 3 small shapes huddled behind her, blankets drawn up to their chins. Their eyes were wide and shining in the dark, like startled deer. "Open the door," Elias said. "Can't," Mara replied. "The frame's jammed. We sealed it to keep the wind out." "Then move back," he said. He stepped to the side, raised his boot, and drove it into the rotted boards. The old pine gave with a groan, breaking inward under the force. Cold air rushed in, scattering the firelight across the room. Mara spun toward him, eyes fierce. "You'll wake the mountain," she hissed. "This slope's been slipping for weeks." But the sound was already there. That deep, rolling creak of soaked earth giving way. Elias knew it before she said another word. The hillside above the shack shuddered, and mud began to trickle down the outer wall like paint. "Out now," he barked. Mara didn't argue. She snatched up a boy no older than 6, yelled for the others, and shoved them toward the broken door. Elias lifted the smallest, a girl, maybe 4, and vaulted into the rain. The moment his boots hit the slope, the shack behind them gave a long, dying sigh and collapsed in on itself, swallowed by the roaring slurry of mud and timber. The world became a blur of water and darkness. Elias grabbed Mara's arm, pulling her toward the trees. One child stumbled, another screamed. He slung the girl up onto his shoulder, clutching her small frame tight. "Keep to the rocks," he shouted. "The mud won't climb that high." They fought their way up the incline until they reached a jagged ridge where a split boulder jutted like a broken tooth. There they huddled, 5 figures soaked and shivering, breaths tearing through the wind. Down below, the shack was gone. Nothing but a smear of wood and river silt where it had stood. Mara stared down at the ruin, her chest heaving. "They had nowhere else," she whispered. "The cabin we had before burned last winter. This was all we found." Elias glanced at the children. Thin faces, hollow eyes, the look of kids who had learned to be quiet long before they learned to read. "Then you're coming with me," he said. "We'll only slow you down." "Lady, I'm not asking." She held his gaze for a long moment, rain streaking her cheeks. Then she nodded. By the time they reached Mercer Ridge, dawn was a pale smudge on the horizon. Elias stabled his horse and carried the smallest child into the barn, wrapping her in a wool blanket. Mara followed, her other 3 standing close behind like shadows. They looked around, half fearful, half awed. The barn's wide rafters, the scent of hay and leather, the soft snort of the mule as it stirred. Elias struck a lantern and hung it on a hook. "You can rest here," he said. Firewood in that bin. There's soup on the stove in the house. Mara hesitated. We can't stay. Someone will notice. Who? He asked sharply. She didn't answer. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes darted toward the hills beyond the ridge. Not like she was looking for a road, but for a threat. Elias narrowed his eyes. You're running from someone. Her silence was answer enough. The oldest boy, maybe 12, stepped forward. Ma didn't steal nothing, he said fiercely. That man lies. What man? Elias asked. Mara's hand dropped to the boy's shoulder. Enough, Henry. But the boy's chin lifted, stubborn. Silas Ward, the one with the papers. Elias felt a chill colder than the rain. He knew that name. Ward was a debt broker, the kind who bought people the way rail companies bought land, with forged signatures and threats of jail. If Mara had crossed him, she wasn't just poor. She was marked. Outside, thunder rumbled again. But this time it wasn't only the storm. Hooves, distant but steady. The sound of riders moving through the mud below the ridge. Mara froze. Elias doused the lantern in one motion, plunging them into darkness. How many? He whispered. 2, maybe 3, she said. They've been following since we left Silver Butte. Elias's jaw set. He reached for the Winchester hanging above the stall door. Then let them come, he muttered. The riders' silhouettes appeared against the lightning, dark shapes moving between the trees, slow and deliberate. One carried a lantern, sweeping it side to side like a predator searching for tracks. Another dismounted and began calling out over the wind. Quinn, you hear me? You've got what don't belong to you. Elias looked at Mara. Her hand tightened around her children. They won't stop, she said. They're hunting the kids. He chambered around, the click echoing like a verdict in the dark. They're on Mercer land now, he said quietly. And what's mine, or under my roof, stays safe. The horses stopped just short of the fence line. One of the men raised the lantern higher. Last warning, he shouted. Turn her over, Mercer. That woman and those brats belong to Silas Ward. Lightning split the sky, white and blinding. When the thunder followed, Elias Mercer stepped out of the barn with the rifle leveled across his arm. And the night, for the first time, went still. The men froze when they saw him. Elias Mercer stood in the rain, rifle steady, lantern light behind him casting his shadow long across the mud. The thunder had stopped, but the world still trembled with the memory of its roar. The leader, tall, slick coat, a grin carved of arrogance, took one slow step forward. You got no part in this, Mercer, he said. We're just here to collect what's owed. Elias didn't move. You're trespassing on private land. State law says you turn around now, or I turn you over to the sheriff. The man laughed. Law? He sneered. I am the law around here. Silas Ward doesn't need a sheriff's permission to take back his property. Behind Elias, Mara's voice came sharp and trembling. People aren't property. The man's grin faltered just for a heartbeat. He tipped his hat toward the sound. There she is. The runaway with 4 mouths and no papers. Ward paid for those kids' care when their father died. He's got receipts, signatures, everything the court needs. Elias frowned. And how much did he pay you to come dig up ghosts on my land? The man's eyes narrowed. Enough to buy silence. You sure you want to lose that rancher? Elias didn't blink. I don't sell silence or people. The 2 men shifted in their saddles, hands brushing gun belts. For a moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then a new sound cut through. The creak of wood and a horse's nervous snort from the ridge. The flood water that had loosened Mara's shack had turned the dirt road into a bog, and one of the riders' horses began to sink, flailing in panic. Mud sucked at its legs. The man cursed, jumping off to pull at the reins. The leader cursed and waved him off. "Leave it. We'll come back at dawn." He turned his glare on Elias one last time. "Tell her Ward'll be back himself next time, and he don't take kindly to thieves." The men disappeared into the dark, their curses fading into the wind. When they were gone, Elias lowered the rifle, but didn't relax. He could feel the weight of Mara's eyes behind him. "You should have let them talk," she said softly. "Now they'll come harder." He turned. "Then we'll be ready." Mara shook her head, pulling her coat tighter. "You don't understand who Ward is. He buys judges, deputies, even the pastor's silence. Once he wants something, he doesn't stop." Elias met her gaze. "Neither do I." The next morning dawned gray and brittle, frost clinging to the fence wire like spider silk. Elias saddled his mare before sunrise and rode into Silver Butte. He stopped first at the telegraph office, sending a short wire to the county marshal in Durango, one of the few men still honest in these parts. Then he crossed the muddy main street toward the blacksmith's, where Jed Nolan, his oldest friend, was hammering iron shoes into shape. "Need a word," Elias said. Jed glanced up. "You look like a man who slept in a storm." "I might have," Elias replied. "You ever heard of Silas Ward?" Jed's hammer stopped mid-swing. "Heard of him? Half the valley's in debt to him, other half's hiding from him. What's he want with you?" "Not me," Elias said quietly. "A woman and 4 children." Jed studied him for a moment, then sighed. "So you went and found yourself trouble with a capital T?" "Maybe," Elias said, "but it's the kind that needs help." Jed set the hammer down and wiped his hands on his apron. "You'll get no law here. Sheriff Brandt's been taking Ward's money for years. If it comes to it, you'd better be ready to hold your own." Elias nodded. "Always have been." When he returned to the ranch, smoke was rising from the chimney, thin but steady. Mara was in the yard, hanging washed clothes on a makeshift line, her hands red from cold water. The children were inside, laughing softly as they fed a rescued chick they'd found in the hayloft. It should have been a peaceful sight. But Elias's stomach twisted at the thought of how temporary it was. He handed Mara a sealed envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Proof you're under my employ. My lawyer in Durango signed it. As long as you're working my land, you're under my protection." She looked down at the paper as if it were something fragile. "You shouldn't get involved," she whispered. "He'll come after you too." Elias's voice softened. "Let him. I've been alone too long to care who knocks at my door." By nightfall, the wind picked up again. The ridge hummed with the sound of wires shaking in their brackets. Inside the house, the children slept in the loft above the kitchen. Mara sat by the fire, staring into the flames, her face drawn tight with thought. "What will you do when he comes?" she asked quietly. Elias poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed her one. "What I always do," he said. "Fix what's broken." But the calm in his tone was a fragile thing. Outside, across the valley, lights flickered along the road. 3, maybe 4 torches, moving slow and steady toward Mercer Ridge. Ward wasn't sending men this time. He was coming himself. The torches appeared first as fireflies, distant glimmers that seemed harmless, until Elias saw the long, dark shape of a wagon behind them. Silas Ward was a man who didn't come quietly. He came with witnesses, paperwork, and the kind of arrogance that thought a sheriff's badge could be bought like a sack of grain. Elias set his coffee down and rose from his chair. "Stay with the children," he told Mara. "No matter what happens, don't open that door." Mara stood too. "You can't face him alone." He met her eyes. "I'm not anymore." By the time Ward's wagon creaked to a stop in the yard, the moon had torn through the clouds. The sheriff, a narrow-shouldered man named Brandt, climbed down first, his hand resting nervously on the butt of his pistol. Behind him came Ward. Slick coat, polished boots, the false smile of a man who thought himself untouchable. "Evening, Mercer," Ward drawled. "Got a few signatures to collect? Shouldn't take long." Elias stepped down from the porch. "You've got a long way to ride for lies," he said. Ward held up a folder. "Not lies. Contracts. Signed by Mrs. Quinn herself years ago, giving guardianship of those children to the Ward Foundation for Education and Labor. They belong with me." Elias didn't even glance at the paper. "Funny thing," he said. "That foundation doesn't exist anymore. My lawyer wired Durango this morning. The charter was revoked last winter for fraud." Ward's grin cracked. "You're bluffing." Elias turned toward the house and whistled. A lantern flicked once from the window. Moments later, 2 riders came galloping down from the ridge. Jed Nolan and a county marshal in a long gray coat. The sheriff paled. "Marshal Reed," he stammered. Didn't expect the law to ride unbought, did you?" Reed's voice was low and dry. "We've been tracking Ward for 6 months. False deeds, child trafficking, debt forgery, the works." Ward's face drained of color. "You can't prove a damn thing." Reed motioned to his deputy, who tossed a folded telegram into the mud. "Confession from your bookkeeper." He sang faster than a canary. For a moment, Ward just stood there, trembling in the torchlight. Then he made a desperate move, lunging for his coat pocket. But before he could draw the pistol hidden there, Elias stepped forward and swung the butt of his rifle across the man's wrist. The weapon clattered into the mud. Ward dropped beside it, clutching his arm. "Enough," Elias said quietly. "You've stolen enough lives." Marshal Reed nodded to his men. "Take him." As the wagons rolled away into the night, Mara appeared at the doorway, the children peeking from behind her skirt. For the first time since Elias had met her, there was no fear in her face, only relief. "Is it over?" she asked. Elias looked toward the fading lanterns of the departing posse. "For good this time." Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed Mercer Ridge in silence. The barn roof shone white beneath the morning sun, and laughter echoed through the yard. The children had built a snowman taller than Ruth, with an old cowboy hat and a carrot nose stolen from Mara's stew pot. Elias stood on the porch, coffee steaming in his hands, watching Mara hang laundry on the line. She smiled when she caught him staring. "You don't rest even on Sundays?" He chuckled. "Not much reason to. You've got me building fences I don't need just to stay near the noise." "Noise?" she teased. "You mean life." He looked at her, the wind tugging her shawl like a child's hand. "Yeah," he said softly. "Life." That spring, Mara and the children stayed on as part of the ranch. By choice, not charity. The boys helped mend fences, Nella planted flowers by the porch, and little Ruth chased chickens across the yard until the hens learned to scatter at the sound of her giggle. The land that had once been quiet and hollow now breathed again. Elias sometimes wondered what strange twist of fate had sent a broken water tower crashing down that night. Without it, he might never have met the woman who turned his silence into music. Months later, at the first summer harvest, the town gathered for a small festival in Silver Butte. The new schoolhouse stood bright against the hills, built from donations and lumber Elias had provided. But it was Mara's name on the plaque. Mara Quinn's School for the Frontier Children. As the townsfolk clapped, she turned to Elias and whispered, "You didn't have to do all this." "I didn't," he said. "You did. You just needed someone to hold the ladder." She smiled then, openly, freely, the kind of smile that didn't need permission. When the sun dipped low and the bells of the new schoolhouse rang for the first time, Elias looked at the crowd. Farmers, children, neighbors once too afraid to speak out against men like Ward, and felt something shift deep inside. He realized that strength wasn't about the fences a man built to keep others out, but the bridges he built to let others in. He had started the year as a man who lived alone on a mountain, believing work could fill the quiet. Now, watching Mara's children chase each other across the field, he understood something simpler, something truer. No fortune lasts forever. But kindness, the kind you give when no one asks, can outlive a man by generations. And as the laughter rolled through the valley, Elias Mercer finally smiled, knowing he'd built something better than wealth. He'd built a home